O'er the wild windy sea, I can hear her calling to me. So let's heave away, haul away, and fill our eyes with the shore. Calls to friends, sail and light, and a tale to brighten the night. So heave away, haul away, and heed the siren song.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Salty Siren. I'm your host with the most, David Bradbury, joined by my fellow maritime history enjoyer, Jack McFarling.
Hello, everyone.
Yep, we're here. I was going to say we're queer. Alright, already off to a rough start. So, let's just hop right into things. So, Jack, I believe you already know what the topic is for today, because we discussed this previously. But, well, actually, do you know? Do you remember?
I do remember.
Okay.
British longships.
Not longships. No, everyone. Today we are going inland, which I think this counts as maritime because it's on the water, but today is going to be over the humble narrowboat of England. Now, Jack...
Okay, but to be fair, they are long.
They are very long. So, Jack, just top of your head, what do you already know about the narrowboat?
I've seen the first, I'd say, 4 seasons of Peaky Blinders.
Fuck, that was going to be my next topic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my experience with the British narrowboats.
Okay, fair enough.
I saw them and I was like, that's what those are.
They are indeed boats that are narrow. Also kind of weird that we've both only seen the first 4 seasons of Peaky Blinders.
Me and my dad were watching it, and I feel kind of bad because he's tried to show me a few shows, and they've all just barely not been able to keep me, preoccupied. I can't, just get bored.
Yeah, I get that, man. And for Peaky fucking Blinders, dude, that show alternates between being really engaging and really fucking dumb, and it equals out to basically what you described. That I will watch a season, be fully aware that there is more of the show to watch, and just not touch it for months. And then be like, oh yeah, the show exists. It contains narrowboats. I should give it another go. And yeah.
An interesting relationship.
An interesting one indeed. Well, having gotten very off topic, what inspired me to make this episode was I happened upon a video on YouTube that I immediately sent to you, Jack, where these guys in the UK had recently opened this enormous tunnel, basically through the side of, I wouldn't quite call it a mountain, but it had been a part of the canal network for the narrowboats forever, and it had been restored fairly recently, and they were just taking a narrowboat through it, and I was kind of fascinated. So I watched several videos on what it was like to live on a narrowboat in modern England, and suffering from one of my frequent bouts of sleeplessness, went down a rabbit hole of binging narrowboat videos on YouTube. I actually sort of awakened a hidden memory in the process that as a kid, I actually took a vacation with my family in the UK where we spent a couple days living off of a narrowboat.
Really?
Yeah, uh, it was super cool. I was handed the rudder for all of like 30 minutes and we almost crashed. So,
Of course.
I mean, hey, I was like 8 years old, but no, it was a super cool experience as a kid, and so I was like, you know what? Why not? It's they don't get a lot of glory, but let's go a bit into their history and kind of see how they got to where they are today.
So are you
So,
president of the Narrowboat Society of Missouri now?
fucking probably, I don't think like anyone else in our I was gonna say great state, but Missouri's
It's
it
it's
ain't the
it's got its
most
ups and
wonderful.
downs.
Yep, it's a rocky road, but yeah, I think I'm like one of very few people in the state of Missouri that can claim to have driven a narrowboat, even if it was for like 30 minutes when I was 8 years old.
Hey, hey.
But uh, I digress. This is a history podcast, so let's get into the history. So, narrowboats came about in the mid 1700s throughout England. But my question for you, Jack, is can you guess what was going on at the time in the mid 1700s besides getting their ass handed to them by a bunch of farmers across the ocean?
Well, um, America was making a fuss. Um, the
Being sus.
making a fuss, being sus. That's us. The U.S.
God damn it.
Trademark. Um, they were also fighting the French, I believe.
I mean,
In the
probably. You could
Yeah.
throw a dart at a board of years, and odds are the British were fighting the French. But it's not quite that. I'll give you a hint. It's considered more of a time period than a specific event.
First Industrial Revolution.
Right on the money.
There you go.
That's right, the Industrial Revolution. So, with a general increase in industry, the old methods of just having horses haul shit everywhere in a cart quickly proved to just be completely unable to keep up with industrial advancements. Like, if you're suddenly producing, 20 times the amount of goods that you were before, having just a horse drawn cart take all of your goods across the country kind of sucks, especially with 1700s era country roads. So, they decided to make a significant advancement in technology as things were at the time. And do you want to guess what that advancement was?
I wonder if it was narrowboats.
So, yes, narrowboats, but specifically, they decided to reinvent the horse drawn carriage by instead of having a horse draw shit everywhere in a cart, they had horses haul boats everywhere
Oh,
because engines didn't really exist yet. So,
so explain the engineering of this to me.
So the first narrowboats were actually like completely unpowered. So engines straight up hadn't been invented yet. And with the stupid amount of shit that they were piling onto these boats, all sorts of like coal, various industrial goods, cotton, occasionally passengers, parcels, um, with just all the weight that came from that manual operation, read making slaves row them proved pretty ineffective. So, for that reason, we resorted to a tactic that we have used since the dawn of time, which is putting a rope around a horse and tying the rope to an object to have the horse haul it. So basically, all these little rivers, there were already kind of footpaths along the side. They would hitch the horse to the front of the boat and have the horse walk along the path on the side of the river, uh, bringing up the boat behind them. Also, in typical 1700s fashion, children were usually the ones guiding the horses. Yay, child labor!
Woo!
Just, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, very cool.
Very cool indeed.
Yeah. If it ain't broke,
So,
don't fix it.
if it ain't broke, make kids do it. Although there were almost certainly earlier instances of sort of canals being constructed, the first canals to feature the locks in the standard size were designed by a one James Brindley and approved by Parliament in 1766. These included the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal, which, by the way, for everyone who has ever wondered how the hell that sauce is pronounced, that's how. Also, the Trent and Mersey Canal. The general idea behind the canals was connecting all of the major ports of England. Hull via the Trent, Liverpool via the Mersey, Bristol via the Severn, and London via the Thames.
Run Worcestershire by me again. How to correctly say it?
Worcestershire.
That's it?
Worcestershire.
Worcestershire. Okay, because not Worcestershire.
Not Worcestershire. Wuss.
Okay.
Like you're calling someone a wuss. This is kind of a tangent, but a lot of very strange English pronunciations can be chalked up to their time being occupied by the French and the weird evolution out of like Old English. But my favorite example of the former is my grandma, when she was still alive in the UK, lived very close to a castle that was pronounced Beaver Castle. But Jack, I want you to guess, how was Beaver spelled?
I'm not even gonna guess. You should just tell me.
Belvoir.
Yeah, that's Beaver.
Belvoir became Beaver. And a lot of the ones like Worcestershire, it's like there isn't a U, nor really an S. I guess you could make an argument for the soft C, but then where the hell did the R go?
The British and their hatred for consonants.
I mean, honestly. But I digress. The canals worked quite well for a time, and many narrowboatmen were actually able to live ashore, kind of have like a home with their families, generally have a good time letting the child laborers do the actual tiring work of walking between cities on foot. But everything changed when the 1830s attacked. The railway was just getting underway, and there began to be some pressure on the local boat boys to make ends meet. This was generally solved in another very industrial revolution turn of events, where a boatman's cabin was added or constructed on board. A lot of people kind of romanticize these like early boatman's cabins because, like, admittedly, they are kind of cute. They've got oh goodness, all sorts of stuff. A steaming kettle, a lot of like gleaming brass parts. Sometimes like lace over the windows, painted housewares, and all of that. And a lot of people think like, oh, that looks so cute. It's got so many cool space-saving inventions and things added to it. But they neglect to realize the reality that things had gotten so hard for the boatman that his whole family was living there.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
the way people are going crazy for tiny houses and van life, that doesn't surprise me.
yeah, like, and admittedly, I don't think I would really complain about like tiny house life, van life, or hell, even, I mean, I've kind of dreamt about buying a narrowboat at some day and like living on it or living aboard. I think it's honestly pretty doable. And when we get into sort of the more modern ones, we can talk about how that might work. But I think like you and maybe one other person, you could do that pretty comfortably, and it'd be kind of fun to be able to move your house from place to place. But back in the 1830s, uh, the boatmen and any family they had now basically were cramming into a Parisian studio apartment on the back of a hauling boat and pretty much had to go wherever the cart needed to go. Hours were long, work was hard, and so, in a very industrial revolution way, uh, life was hard too. But things were looking up towards the later end of the 1800s and really more so into the early 1900s. The horse was steadily phased out in favor of early engines, much like the horse was phased out pretty much everywhere in favor of early engines.
Rip horses.
But rip horses indeed. So it became much easier to move way more cargo with less people. Uh, and on top of that, with the addition of the motor, a practice became pretty popular known as buddy boating. That's Butty, or buddy boat, or butty. So,
Butty.
butty. Uh, no longer a real sort of horse to haul the boats. Instead, what they would do is they would have a sort of train of narrowboats, where the front boat was powered, usually with a steam engine, diesel as they kind of became available, and that boat would haul a second unmanned buddy boat. It basically allowed them to double up on the amount of cargo they were able to haul and really didn't have a whole lot of downsides. The only issue was that the secondary boat still had to be steered, so you kind of had to have twice the crew, but when the crew is one person, it's not that big of a deal. Uh, on some of the wider canals, such as the Grand Union Canal, sometimes they would even rope the boats side by side so they could sort of sail as a wide narrowboat. But in general, it is kind of an interesting little advancement. The canal system just generally expanded over time, uh, merging in with a lot of the various rivers throughout the UK. But it wasn't set to last forever, because by 1945 uh, onwards, it really just all of this sort of commercial hauling on the narrowboat canals just fell off a cliff, and the last like regularly scheduled hauling took place in 1970. Granted, some sort of irregular stuff continued into the 1980s and beyond, uh, with 2 million tons of aggregate being carried along Grand Union between 1976 and 1996.
All right.
But uh, in general, it was really popular throughout the Industrial Revolution because it allowed them to move huge amounts of cargo uh, from place to place throughout the UK. And they were able to do this despite the sort of greatly varying heights throughout the UK by the lock system. And the cool part about me having taken a vacation to do exactly this is that I can actually kind of tell you what the process is like.
Cool.
So,
Walk us through it.
first off, it would depend on which side of the lock you were approaching first. But in general, the lock would either be. So let's say, for an example, you are sailing towards the lock and you need to move up in elevation. If the lock is sort of ready for you, or the last person to come through was needing to go down in elevation, the first set of lock gates would be open in front of you with sort of a large, almost chamber of sorts with various portholes across the sides for you to sail into. You would sail into that, pull yourself up along one of the sides, usually, uh, whichever was easier to get to, but run up a ladder and close the gates behind you. These would close into sort of a chevron with the point of the chevron facing uh, inwards towards the lock. So once that was done, which I luckily was on a family vacation, so I had my brother slash my dad to run over to the other side and close that side of the lock. But once you got the lock closed behind you, you had to go to these huge like cranks that were built into the ground and turn those. And as you did so, it would open these sort of release valves that would allow water from the raised up part of the river to pour out through those portholes into the lock. And it's kind of an interestingly simple bit of engineering in that because the chevron on the lower side of the lock pointed inwards, as the water level rose, the pressure of the water added pressure to that chevron and kept it watertight. So the water level
Interesting.
would raise in the sort of central chamber as you continued cranking and like pumping water in from the raised up part of the river or the canal. And once you got to the point where it basically wouldn't fill with water anymore because you were level with the upper part of the canal, you would move up to the second set of gates, which were again a chevron sort of pointing onwards into the raised up part of the canal. Once you opened those, you were safe to sort of just sail your boat along and continue down the canal. But despite all of that, it's a pretty simple system. It's basically two angled doors that, with the pressure of the water, become watertight and so can maintain the two different water levels, and then basically just a pump system to get water in and or out of the canal. Because if you wanted to go down from the upper level, it was the same thing, but in reverse. You sailed into the canal that was already at your level, got out, closed the gate behind you, uh, turned the pumps the other direction to let water release out through the lower gate, through portholes in it, and once you've been lowered down to the same level, you just open the gates and on you went.
Very cool. I
Yeah.
I know you kind of went down the Top Gear rabbit hole. Have you seen the episode where they make an airboat out of a van and they try to drive it through all the English canals?
No, I have not.
There is
Enlighten me.
in that episode, they try to. I mean, you can imagine an airboat that is at least 20 feet long is going to be problematic on the British canal system.
God.
They're blowing away cafes full of people trying to just eat their lunch, and they're knocking dudes out of kayaks. But
Oh, that's good.
but they tried to get their airboat through a lock, and in their usual style, they were doing it horribly, and Hammond was ascending the ladder that you put up to get out of the lock and release the pressure from the higher side, and someone had leaned on the airboat on the opposite end and was shooting just buckets of water at Hammond, and he was just kind of stuck in the middle of the ladder. He couldn't really go up or down. Oh, it's good.
Oh man, that is good. Oh jeez. Okay, so now we get on to sort of modern narrowboats and their usage. So the number of like licensed narrowboats on canals and rivers throughout the UK is tracked by the Canal and River Trust, or CRT, so close to CBT. Um,
What is
a
what does CRT mean for a TV? It means, you know, what Melee players use to.
Yeah, I no idea. I also never understood that. Why like CRTs were so preferable, which also it seems kind of like isn't that whole concept just fucking wild? Like people play a game that's old as hell so competitively that they seek out old TVs because it makes it slightly more authentic.
Well, I think for Melee and listeners, this is Super Smash Brothers Melee, which is a game where it's a fighting game and people take it very seriously. Um, I think the way frame rates are translated from the N64 to a CRT is faster or better somehow on a CRT than with converting analog to digital with a modern TV.
Huh. Yeah, that's odd. I wouldn't really considered that.
But
Well,
anyway,
anyway, getting off topic again. So CRT, the Canal and River Trust, formerly British Waterways, in 2006, they estimated that there were 27,000 narrowboats on the canals and rivers of the UK. By 2014, this had risen to over 30,000. And they estimated, which I thought this was kind of weird and exceptionally modern British. In 2006, they had a good guess at how many unlicensed boats there were, which I'm not sure how much you know about like daily life in the UK, but man, you need a license for everything.
Yeah, it's a little big brother over there in jolly old UK.
Yeah, man. Like, act. It amazes me that there is a TV license. Like that
A
you have to
TV
pay.
license?
Yeah, you have to pay additional taxes to the government if they can prove that you have a TV. But the emphasis on like if they can prove that you have a TV. And so like my family over there and like YouTubers that I've watched and things like that are just like, yeah, like someone will knock on your door. It'll be like, hey, yeah, I'm from the government. I need to come in and see if you have a TV. But you can just be like, no, you can't enter my house. And they get like really belligerent about it. But yeah, the British government is big on their licenses. And so apparently back in 2006 they bothered with like, now how many unlicensed boats have we got on these waterways? But horrible British accent aside, uh, most of the modern boats are pretty much just not used for commercial purposes whatsoever. As I
Sure.
mentioned previously, narrowboats have kind of become romanticized in the public eye, and I mean, somewhat justifiably so. If you get sort of a traditional English narrowboat, they have like some really intricate sort of painted decoration along the sides. It's kind of like a point of pride to have your narrowboat look especially pretty with dazzling colors, uh, painted embroidery, particularly roses and castles as sort of fixtures and fittings. But seriously, I'll have to send you some pictures of these. Some of them look like artisan crafted armor
Oh
almost.
yeah, these are cool.
Yeah. So pretty much none of the actual none of the actual like working narrowboats ever had anything like that. But as it kind of became romanticized of like, oh, we can go and live on the boat for a week or two, that you could have a houseboat that you just kind of had as a home away from home. A lot of people started really sprucing them up. From what I can tell, on the research that I did, there was kind of a heated debate in the narrowboating community, which is a weird sentence to say, but
How heated was it?
honestly not that heated. But there's a lot of disagreement on like where the tradition of kind of painting and like engraving came from. A pretty popular theory is that they believe that it's Romani. So, again, peaky fucking blinders. Like how the Romani people in the UK tended to have like very intricately painted and engraved carriages as a part of sort of their cultural history. Some believe that that transferred to the narrowboat, and that's where it got its start. Um, uh, some suggested that it came from sort of the clockmaking industry. That there was a claim that clocks at the time tended to have like decorative faces. Um, there's also Japanning, which was a practice at the time, which was Europeans trying to imitate East Asian lacquer work, where they were able to sort of imprint like images onto wood, onto like trays in a more traditional sense. But some people thought that it came from that, or pottery influences. But there's really no solid conclusion. Uh, similar folk art styles have popped up in Germany, Bangladesh, Turkey, to name a few. So it really was probably a combination of things.
That's a safe bet.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like
But
this style a lot better than American style of decorating boats. Um,
which flags?
well, yeah, I'm thinking Lake of the Ozarks, um, like the show Ozark. If you've seen that show, um,
I have
all
seen
the
the
boats
first
are,
two seasons, so no spoilers beyond that, but continue.
yeah, no spoilers. Just an accurate reflection of real life. In the Ozarks, they have boats that are white and beautiful and are made to look very expensive, and then usually on the back there is a customized decal or painting. Um, for example, my uncle has a boat he called the Freshman 400. It's a long story why I got that name, but um, but yeah, this is cool. This artisan painting engraving thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's partially as sort of a backstory for why my family went on a trip of staying on a narrowboat. Um, Jack has met my mom, but I know you haven't, dear listeners. And my mom likes pretty much anything decorating related. She was a interior design major for quite some time. And basically, the whole reason that we went on this trip is that she thought that decorated narrowboats were incredibly pretty to look at. And so she wanted to spend some time on one and kind of admire the artistry of it. So the one we were on is much like the ones that you're able to pull up that have a lot of the sort of like intricate lace work over the windows, and it's very like old fashioned. It kind of feels almost like a pub on the inside. But speaking of the inside, let's get to the size, the different types of narrowboats. So the key thing that makes a narrowboat is width, which must be less than 7 feet in order to navigate the British canals. So a lot of the older boats can be pretty close to that. A good number of them actually going over at 7 feet and 1.5 inches, or even slightly wider than that. And that leads to some trouble where the turns of the canals or the locks can actually just not be possible. Um, let's see. For that reason, modern boats are usually produced to a maximum of 6 feet and 10 inches to guarantee easy passage through the complete canal system. But because they're so skinny, a good amount of narrowboats are actually built much longer to try and sort of give more space to the people on board. But generally, the longer you go, you run into the same issues as going over 7 feet in width. The maximum length is about 72 feet, um, and it matches the length of the longest locks on the system. But a lot of modern narrowboats are built with kind of the assumption that you aren't actually living in them full time, so they tend to be shorter to pretty much let you cruise wherever you want to on the canal system. Let's see. So the shortest lock on the main network is, and I hope I'm saying this right, British relatives, please don't hate me, Salter Hebel. It's the middle lock on the Calder and Hebel navigation, and it's about 56 feet long. But it's actually kind of a wide canal, so the lock is about 14 feet wide. So with that, you can kind of angle your boat in the lock and actually get a longer one to fit in there.
Diagonally.
Yep, literally the next word out of my mouth. By lying diagonally, it can fit in there pretty alright. On some of the more isolated waterways, locks can get as short as 40 feet. But when it was possible to kind of avoid going through the locks altogether, narrowboats were built a little larger, because with the assumption of, hey, you're not going to be taking this past like this lock or this lock, you're just going to be kind of cruising between a few points. They could build them a little bigger, and in general, they could get up to 89 feet in length, which
It's a big ship.
it's a big boy. Some of the bigger ones out there on the waters when we took our vacation were, yeah, just absolutely huge compared to ours. But yeah, it's pretty fun. With that, there's also the sort of main distinction is the stern type, as well as the classification. So the three main types of narrowboats are traditional, cruiser, and semi-traditional. So with traditional, it's it again comes down to kind of like the stern area, but it really kind of speaks to like the style of the boat itself. A traditional stern or traditional narrowboat has got pretty much the smallest area at the back, the least external space, and tends to be like entirely covered. These were like your old timey narrowboats intended for living on, that sort of thing, or just like a fun cruise. Uh, they have a super short back deck, so like 2 to 3 feet, basically just enough room for you to stand there with the rudder. Um, but that gives you a lot of space on the boat that can then be enclosed. A lot of the ones that I've seen have like full kitchens, bathroom, like bench seating with tables, stove tops. Like it can really be like a full living situation, and a uh, traditional narrowboat will really give you the best options for that.
Yeah, another interesting contradiction to traditional American recreational boats. Um, American boats try to capitalize on places that you can hang out outside in the air the most, versus these are kind of the exact opposite.
Yeah. Well, and the next type is probably a bit closer to like a more American style of like leisure craft, but that would be the cruiser stern. Uh, it's got a much bigger stern, a much bigger sort of back area, usually about 4 to 8 feet in length along the back. I've seen a couple different variations that have like a small enclosed area off of the stern as well. But in general, they tend to have like much more open air space, but still compared to like an American speedboat or something like that. It's got like a solid little enclosed area, and of course it's a narrowboat, so it's very, very long and very slow by comparison. Then finally, you've got the semi traditional stern, which is pretty much just a halfway point. If you're wanting it for more of kind of like a permanent living space, but you also want to have kind of like a fun outdoor area, uh, it's usually less of the craft is covered. It's got kind of a cruiser style stern, so a larger like stern deck and area to man the rudder, but it kind of strikes a balance between entirely enclosed and almost entirely open. But with most modern narrowboats, their hulls are going to be either steel or aluminum. Although there are some that were constructed before the 90s that are going to have a fiberglass hull. But
Wow.
for the most part, they're a lot of them tend to aim more for like the traditional stern, sort of the traditional construction, because as I've mentioned a couple times, the sort of old timey traditional narrowboat has very much been romanticized, and with a lot of like enclosed space, that gives you a lot of area to sort of paint and display and show off. Uh, so it can be very enjoyable, very livable, especially if it's just like one or two people. And if you pick one that's, kind of one of the smaller sizes, you could basically navigate the entirety of the river system of the UK. And
Very
with
cool.
that, this one's probably a bit of a shorter episode, but that is the end of my notes. The humble narrowboat. All of its parts encompassed from a humble, horse drawn, child labor using Industrial Revolution past to a very quaint, kind of comfy house future. They seem to only really be increasing in popularity in the UK, and you can pick one up for about $60,000.
That is not as much as I thought you would say.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised when I originally went down my whole rabbit hole of like looking at videos. I was immediately like, "Damn, this has reawakened my ancient need to own a narrowboat." And so I looked it up and was like, "Holy shit, that's actually pretty cheap." But I mean, granted, pretty cheap for something you can live in full time. Like sixty
Yeah.
thousand dollars is obviously nothing to sneeze at, but like I don't know. I
Yeah,
could
that's
be kind of convinced to like do it for maybe a few years or something like that.
that's definitely somewhat attainable. Um yeah, I've talked to my family. We go to Gulf Shores every year and we always see big boats going by on the intercoastal waterway, which you can navigate a really good chunk of the east coast of the United States without ever seeing the ocean. You do have to get on the oceans at some points, but um, this thing, well, we were doing some calculations and someone worked it out where if you just lived on the intercoastal waterway and used your boat, the gas prices and running your boat, the cost is just astronomical. But
Oh, I don't doubt it.
not that I don't think it'd be that cheap to do it with this narrowboat either, but probably a lot better.
Yeah. Something to note from my own personal experience on it. There's like virtually no, pretty much no point where you're on a body of water that is choppy at all.
Yeah.
Like, most of these things make a steady sort of like bub, 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 like noise bleh, as you're just like putting along. You're barely going
Right.
any speed whatsoever. And I imagine with, the relatively small engine that it takes to get a boat going that fast, like it's probably pretty fuel efficient. But at the same time, if you want to like moor it anywhere for a significant amount of time, like practically, like if you land a job in a certain city and you need to kind of have your boat docked in that city for an extended period, you have to pay like docking fees. Um,
Oh
there's
yeah,
all
yeah. All the
all
all, all the hidden costs of owning a boat.
yeah, docking fees, and you got to take it out of the water for maintenance every once in a while, and I could definitely see how it would get very expensive over time.
Yes, listeners, invaluable financial advice. Don't buy a boat ever.
Honestly, it's just unless you're like using it constantly, but even then, it's really expensive. So I don't know. If you're gonna buy a boat, only buy it if you're gonna use it constantly and you're okay with putting up with really, really high maintenance costs. That's our advice.
You
Official
can take that
Salty
to the
Siren
bank.
approved. Take it to the bank, indeed. Well, all right, Jack. Do you have any sort of closing comments on the narrowboat? Was it sufficiently naval history for you?
They do float on water, so it's good for me.
No, and I recognize that it's not a full like naval thing. There was never a
Right.
militarized narrowboat of any sorts. Although that would be kind of badass. Um,
Just a a narrowboat bristling with machine gun barrels through little portholes.
oh yeah, like honestly, when I first was like looking at some of the older narrowboats, it really reminded me of the Merrimack from the U.S. Civil War. Have you ever
Oh,
seen
sure.
depictions of that? Yeah, like the really old like Ironsides ships when they've been kind of
Yeah, it looks like a a gold bar, at Fort Knox. Just make that out of iron and get it to float somehow.
just have like a few portholes with guns sticking out. I think you
Right.
could make it work. Zombie apocalypse. Our plan is now to militarize a narrowboat.
I could see that being a cool thing in Peaky Blinders in
Yeah.
a setup with emblazoned with machine guns, a narrowboat.
Oh yeah. Well, dude, speaking of machine guns and Peaky Blinders, the first point where or the first like major point where I was like, this is fucking dumb, was actually like the end of the first season. So, listeners, if you haven't watched the first season of Peaky Blinders, I mean, honestly, at this point, are you really going to start? But anyway, if you care about spoilers, close your ears, stop the podcast, do what you got to do. The end of the first season, um, is it Billy Kimber who's like the main villain of that arc?
The the the
The
commu the communist or
no, like the bad guy who like runs the racetracks. Yeah, it is because it's
oh
the
yeah.
I'm Billy Kimber. I run the racetracks, and I'm gonna have you shot against a post. Like, yeah, that guy. But anyway, when they
Yeah.
like royally piss him off, and he's like coming to really fuck him up, the whole time I was like, dude, they stole machine guns. They stole machine guns. Like, he's rolling down here thinking he's all fucking tough in his car and like with his men walking alongside. And it's gonna be so fucking sick. They just like gun him down, and they've like single-handedly eliminated their biggest rival. And then the fucking communist dude just walks up, machine gun in hand, and stands in a line in the middle of the street with the rest of the Peaky Blinders and is like, yeah, get off our turf, punk. And then Billy Kimber just like goes home. It was the most anticlimactic horse shit ever. And oh, dude, it made me so mad.
I can hardly remember it, actually.
I'm not surprised.
Maybe two different responses to that disappointment.
Yeah, it just like that irritated me. But I was like, I'm basically done, and like finished out the season. And then what convinced me to not touch it for a very long time was the beginning of the second season. The communist dude that they made such a big deal about him coming back at the end of the first season is dead off screen. What the fuck? Oh,
what happened?
Man.
Oh, he died.
They're just like, he caught a disease and died. Also, another thing I've noticed with just like Peaky Blinders in general, they just fucking forget about the kids. Like 90% of the time. The characters keep popping out children like it's nobody's business. And then so like his sister Ada has her baby.
Right.
Her baby has not been even so much as mentioned in 3 seasons.
No.
Like, he exists during the second season and then just dis-a-fucking-peers. Sorry, this has become a Peaky Blinders podcast, but it's
an
okay
anti-Peaky
show.
Blinders podcast.
Anti-Peaky Blinders. Yeah. I don't know. That show is just whack. But, well, do you want to count that as our sort of end of the show? What have you been doing outside of the show? Or do we want to talk a few minutes about that?
No, tell me something. What's new?
Well, I'm going to steal this one. It's something we've both been participating in, but I have started running a Lancer campaign. For those who are unaware, Lancer is a dope-ass mech tabletop RPG. I've been running it for Jack here, and basically my groomsman, my brother, a couple other friends of ours, and at least in my opinion, we've been having a pretty good time. I've been enjoying it a lot, enjoying prepping stuff and running the campaign, and yeah, it's just been a really good time. RPGs are fun, people. Try them out if you haven't already.
Yeah, it's a cool game.
What about you, Jack? What's something you've been doing that isn't Lancer?
A few things. I am I'm officially approved as a adopter for a dog. So
hell yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So hopefully get that going soon. And and I'm excited to get my campaign of Monster of the Week up and running again. Dear listener, Monsters of the Week is another RPG that's really good. It's based on Buffy the Vampire Slayer supernatural that kind of show.
Yeah.
Every 3 or 4 sessions, you fight one monster and the mystery unfolds. Really fun.
Yeah. I really liked the first few seasons of Supernatural. And while I have no experience with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that sort of like something creepy is going on. What is that creepy thing? I think that's a really fun sort of trope, but trope in an endearing sense.
Yeah. Fun game.
I mean, honestly, our Lancer campaign is kind of a similar thing. Like, something funky's going on. What the hell is it?
Norman Reedus and the Funky Fetus.
God damn it. Oh, man. Death Stranding. Hideo Kojima and his Strand-type games. Dude, that will never not crack me up. Oh, man. It's like...
It's pretty good.
Someone just asks you, like, hey, what's this new game about? Like, it's a game type game. It's like solid. That tells me fucking nothing.
Right.
Oh man. But with that last tangent sort of capping us off, thank you guys so very much for tuning into another episode of The Salty Siren. Please feel free to continue listening to us on the podcast service of your choice. We're out on, we're out on YouTube, we're out on Spotify. Are we on Apple Podcasts, Jack? You know the full list better than I.
Yeah, it's, we're on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, a lot of podcast hosting websites that I've never heard of, honestly.
Yeah. So pretty much wherever you want. If you prefer listening to us on some other thing, feel free. Also, I have a feeling what you're going to mention, Jack, but go ahead.
Just wanted to, because we haven't done it yet and I kept forgetting, I'd like to thank Colin Drown for our lovely cover art. He is at Colin_DRAWN, Colin Drawn, on Instagram. And I'd also like to ask friend of the show, Joe Koziak, for mixing and mastering the intro and the outro. And yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, that's not what I thought you were going to mention, but I wholeheartedly agree. Colin and Joe are great friends of the show, great guys all around, and did fantastic work with our intro and our little siren emblem there. But what I was going to mention is the fact that we have a Patreon. In fact...
I was also going to say that.
Okay, I beat you to it.
Yeah. Yes, please support us. We're The Salty Siren on Patreon. We appreciate any and all donations.
Yes, very much so. And with that, thank you, dear listeners, for learning all about narrowboats with us, and we'll look forward to talking with you next time. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Oh, Johnny, Johnny, call and hear the ancient song of sailors long forgone and sailors still to be. A sweet and solemn tune spoke gently by the tide. Oh, Johnny, Johnny, fall, join the song.